And as she said, I have a strong passion for helping students, but I really love to help everybody in this field that I'm in. I've been working at the university for about 12 years now. And I've taught this type of material in 4 different schools. And I've landed in the business school, and I really appreciate the opportunity they've given me. And outside of the university, I actually do things like this where I get to share content with professionals, and I do a little bit of career coaching on the side as well. So hopefully that shows you and lets you know that I've got some good things to say tonight. So that being said, I'm going to start sharing my screen. I've got a little presentation put together, and even if we've got a small group, I'm completely okay. I'd love if you're willing to get some participation. Let me see. There we go. Okay. As we talk about networking, because networking is one of those things that I could sit here and I could talk to you about it, which we're going to do. I'm going to share different things, but I also love to open up the table for conversation to hear some of your stories, maybe some ways that you think about networking a little bit. I find that when I talk about this with my students, I'm always surprised by the things that they consider networking and some of the reasons that they are scared off by it. And so then I like to try to show them why some of those fears might be a little unfounded. And so that's why I've kind of titled this presentation tonight, or this webinar, Changing Misconceptions and Developing Best Practices with Networking. So that being said, I see we have a few people here, and you're welcome to use the chat. Some of these questions might have a little bit more verbose answer potentially, but I'm curious if you're willing to share with us what does networking mean to you when you hear that word that sometimes scares people, sometimes scares students. What does it mean to you? How would you define networking for yourself? Is there anybody that would like to talk to us about that or share their idea? And if not, I'm prepared to tell you some of the things that I've heard from my students as well. So when I ask that question of my classes, typically the response that I get is students will say, it feels like asking people for favors, or I envision an event where they put one of those name tags on that doesn't stick really well on your shirt. It says, my name is, and then the evening is filled with sweaty handshakes and trying to juggle hors d'oeuvres, things like that. Lindsay, I appreciate it. Looks like you've said, let's see what we've got here. I know it means connecting to others. I fear the genuineness of relationships being affected by the need to form a relationship based on exchange. I really like that you've said that, and hopefully some of the things I talk about today will kind of look at things a little bit differently so we don't feel like it's an exchange process. And like, I appreciate your comments as well. Contacting people I know to see if they can help me. I'll be honest, you're right. Asking for favors does always feel like uncomfortable, potentially a burden to other people. And so I'd like to use the evening, the few minutes we have today, to talk about how I want to share with you why networking isn't necessarily an exchange. It may eventually down the road, as you flesh it out, look like that. I mean, it's also not necessarily always asking for favors, right? That being said, before we jump in, I know I've got some experience. I'll share my own because the chat is going to be difficult to get full networking stories and examples. But even in my own professional career, I've been at the university now, I believe, about 12 years, and I have not had a position where I have had to blindly apply. What I mean by that is, at some level, I have used networking to move around to the different offices I've worked in, whether that would be through somebody recommending a position to me, whether that's happened before. I've had a couple. I've had another opportunity where I saw the opportunity posted, but I knew a few people in the office. So before I even put in my application, I reached out, asked a few questions, set up some coffee dates, and kind of worked that way. So I think once you kind of figure out the process and how networking can really benefit you, hopefully it will help you feel a little bit more comfortable, and then you can do more of it, right? So let's jump in right here. Let me minimize this for a second and try to control. Like, here we go. So like I said, my idea, like with my students, I tell them we're going to kill the word networking in what it means to you, not necessarily the actual term, right? The term's not going away, but we're going to kill all the misconceptions that come around it, right? Like we even talked about in the chat, asking for favors, an exchange, or some sort of maybe a feeling of shallow exchange. And really, when we break it down to the brass tacks, I want you to start thinking about networking as having conversations and developing relationships with actual real people. And once you kind of get to that level of thinking, it really is no harder than sitting down and chatting with friends. So that's what we're looking for. That's what I'm looking for as we talk about this idea. So just a couple things as to why we network. I've always liked this graphic because it really tells the story of how employers look for positions. I spent 6 years prior to jumping into teaching full time. I spent 6 years in the Arts and Sciences Career Services Office, and one of my main responsibilities was leading all of our employer relations efforts. And basically, what that meant is I would travel across the country, Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York City, and I'd meet with companies to find out what their recruiting needs were, talk to them about how their hiring processes work, and really, at some level, convince them to hire our students at Indiana University. And when you do something like that, you learn so much about how actual jobs are filled in organizations. Now, I understand that the way that employers do entry level hiring is a little bit different. They come to campuses, they offer students jobs, but at some level, some of the data and some of the information that I learned is valuable across the age range and the experience range, right? So a lot of times, the reason I show this graphic is because basically what I'm trying to get you to understand is the little bit of the iceberg that's showing is the advertised jobs that you see posted on Indeed, LinkedIn, some of these sites. But really, what's going on under the surface is this hidden job market. And what I mean by that is employers want to, and maybe you've been in a situation like this at an organization that you've worked in, if you've ever had a hiring capacity or you've been on a selection committee, something like that. It's so much easier to use the idea of networking or use relationships inside the office to find positions to fill that role, right? Connecting with other people that you trust in an organization and having them refer people. There's lots of companies offer referral bonuses, but the majority of the hiring that's done is not done through the advertised posted jobs. It's done through networking, through the hidden job market. And hopefully we can talk a little bit about how you can tap into that and learn to navigate your way around that. Some statistics I like to talk about. When you think about if you're an active job seeker, again, that may not be everybody's situation here, but even if you're looking to, you don't have to be unemployed to be a job seeker, right? You could be in a job where you're looking for, maybe just new opportunities. Maybe you're finding things a little stale in your organization. But 90% of your job or internship search should be some sort of networking activity. And as you can see here with these bullets, I've really kind of broadened what falls under the category of networking. I'm not going to read all of these. You can read these on the screen if you'd like, but we're going to talk more a little bit later today about how you can use LinkedIn effectively for those of you that have experience using that. We have the obvious things that you think about: networking events, maybe attending conferences in your field. If you're a university graduate, maybe using alumni databases, things of that nature. But what I really want to focus on is that idea of informational interviews. that to me is one of the greatest ways that you can connect with people. And you're going to kind of see a common thread of what I talk about that comes back to that idea. And when I mean an informational interview, what I define as an informational interview is any conversation that you have with, it doesn't necessarily have to be a stranger or somebody that you don't know, but typically the format of an informational interview kind of lends itself more towards reaching out and talking to a stranger. But you find somebody in a field of interest of yours, in an organization of interest of yours, and you write down a list of questions that you want to know about what they do, about what their organization does, and you ask them for 20 minutes of their time, and you ask those questions, and you just learn. You approach it as a learning experience. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about today. So a couple statistics that I show my students that I think are really relevant is 70% of people in 2016 were hired at a company where they had a connection. So again, this is kind of going to that hidden job market. I mean, I look at a stat like that and I think only 30% of jobs were filled with no connection. So that to me just kind of really emphasizes that iceberg image again, right? 35% of surveyed professionals say that a casual conversation on LinkedIn has led to a new opportunity. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to use LinkedIn effectively, because that can be a great tool, especially in this time of COVID, where we're all driven more towards our computers, our computer screens, and this kind of virtual connection, right? 80% of professionals consider professional networking to be important to career success. And networking can be something that you do, even like I said, once you're hired in an organization, you really never should stop networking. And then the last piece here, 61% of professionals agree that regular online interaction with their professional network can lead the way into possible job opportunities. So again, these are things that you want to think about, right? Because even if you're currently employed in a job that you like, you never know. We're never shy about turning down potential opportunities that can put us in a better spot or land us in a better place. So the first thing I want you to think about is, I've got a couple simple things to remember. You're going to see a thread kind of running throughout this talk. But the first thing I want you to consider is be curious. Approach networking as thinking about other people's success. Dale Carnegie is, anybody that does any work in sales or connecting of people, he's kind of the godfather of winning people or influencing people. And so I really like this stat. You can be more successful in 2 months by becoming really interested in other people's success than you can in 2 years trying to get other people interested in your own success. This quote means a lot to me in my philosophy of networking. I had a friend who he works in development for IU, for our university. And he told me his mentor one time shared an anecdote with him that kind of plays on this idea. And I find it can be applicable to networking as well. So in the development field, he says, if you start a relationship by asking people for money, you'll get advice. But if you start a relationship asking people for advice, the money will eventually come. And that makes a lot of sense in a field where you're constantly asking people for money. But I really feel like that has a lot of overlap in this idea of networking and building relationships, being curious of other people. So if you find people out there that maybe you don't know, or maybe you are people from your past that you've lost touch with, and you reach back out to them to establish that connection, if you ask them for advice on what makes them successful, ask them for advice on things that they do in their career, and you lead with that and lead with curiosity about their career and what they do, you will eventually get that help that you're looking for. But if you come in and you look at networking as asking people for favors, and even if you try to do it subtly, people can see it coming, right? I work with students, and students aren't necessarily always nuanced in their way that they approach conversations. And I don't have any specific examples, but I've heard stories through other people in the career development field at IU about students sending blind emails to alumni, asking for jobs, asking for internships, without really anything more than a 2-sentence introduction in an email, right? But the students that are really successful I see in doing this, they find ways to get a mentor who's more established, or just reach out to an employer or a recruiter or an alum, and they start asking them questions about their career and what they do. And that helps to build a rapport, right? People love talking about themselves. And when people talk about themselves, the way conversations develop is they say some things about themselves, and then eventually they start asking you questions about yourself. And so then you can start talking about the things that matter to you and the things that you're looking for. But that conversation was really started with your curiosity about what they do and what they're doing. So just a couple statistics about conversation and relationship building that I think are really relevant for this. It takes about 6 conversations with someone before they truly know who you are and have some idea of your character and competence. Now, I think you could probably flesh that out a little bit differently depending on the depth of the conversation. But what this tells me is there's something to building connections, starting a relationship with somebody, and keeping in touch. That's part of networking as well, is not just that initial reach out, but building rapport enough that, 2 months after your initial conversation, you have a little check-in, and you touch base and you see how that goes. And eventually you'll start building this natural rapport. I actually have an example from my personal life about this. About 3 years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, a student at a different university that was not the university that I teach at found me on LinkedIn, and he saw the field that I worked in. He saw that I had experience in career development. He was a young professional looking to change his major. He wasn't sure what he wanted to do. And he just wanted to ask me questions about student affairs, career development. So he sent me a LinkedIn message. We set up a brief meeting, and I answered. He came prepared with some really great questions about what I do, and asked me some questions about myself. And I liked talking about myself, right? And then I started asking him some things about himself, and the conversation went really well for about 30 minutes. And at the end of the conversation, he said, "I really appreciate the time you spent with me. Would you mind if we chatted in a couple months if I had some follow-up questions or something like that?" And I said, "That's absolutely fine. I'm happy to give you the time." Long story short, based on some of the conversations that we had, he ended up changing his major. He went into the student affairs field, went and got his master's at a different university in student affairs, and he's now in a similar field. He's in a student affairs field. He's working to get into career development, but we've maintained that relationship over 4 years, and now I kind of serve as a mentor to him. And so he reaches out to me about all kinds of things, and we have regular standing meetings every month or every couple months, depending on schedules. All that because he saw my profile on LinkedIn. He found me through a connection of his somehow, but he was curious about what I do and he came prepared to ask me some questions about myself. And so, 25, 30 conversations later, we now have a really great bond and a professional rapport that is really unmatched. So people gain 3 things through networking: private information that's not found anywhere else, right? If you're thinking about being a job searcher, you can find lots of information out about a company on websites, right? The internet is great for that. There's Glassdoor, there's LinkedIn, there's Indeed. You can go to company websites. But if you find somebody that's internal to a company and you ask them some questions, you're going to be privy to some information and an insight to an organization that you're not going to find in other places. And I think that can be really great to just knowledge building. You're going to get influence in wider arenas, right? Every time you reach out to talk to somebody new, you're growing your sphere of influence. You're adding yourself to theirs. You potentially can get connected to people that they know, and so on and so forth. And then you also access diverse skills, right? You're meeting somebody else. You're kind of tapping into something maybe that you don't do all the time. And then that can help you get things done. And then, so it's not necessarily about how many people you talk to at a given moment, but how many focused, helpful conversations you can have. And we're going to talk a little bit about moving forward about organization and how to do some of that. But just a couple tips I want to share with you. When you approach these relationships, come at them with a heart of learning, a heart of curiosity, and a mindset of listening, right? We all know what it's like to talk to somebody that's not a great listener. Maybe they ask you a question and then they go off somewhere else. I've got 3 kids, 13, 10, and 7. And my 13-year-old is just naturally born a curious girl. I love her. She asks lots of questions. But sometimes she'll ask me a question, and as I start answering it, you can just see her mind disappear and go somewhere else, right? And so it feels very distracting to not be able to fully answer her questions. So when you come to a conversation like this, be prepared to just listen. Ask the questions, come prepared with your questions, and then listen for the things that they have to say. And listen intently. Like, what are some clues that you're picking up about them? Do they start the conversation or the introductory talking about their family? Do they talk about some of their hobbies? What are the things that interest them? Because those are also kind of things that help build rapport, right? Maybe you can find a point of commonality based on something they said. Maybe they talk about their kids in a pleasant, fun way, and you've got kids, and you can touch base about that. Maybe they're a sports fan, and it's baseball season, and they say something about the Cubs, and you love the Cubs. So look for some of those interesting things that come out, and then look for the clues to how they talk about their job, because that can also be something where you can learn a lot about an organization. If you start to build a rapport with somebody and they get really candid with you, and they start talking about their organization, maybe you learn that based on some of the things they talk about, maybe this isn't the place for you, or this isn't where you want to work, or how they talk about their work is very different than what you thought of that industry or about what they do. So just keep good listening ears on for ways that you can continue to build rapport with those people. The second thing, so be curious is our first point. Be authentic is our second. Come into this conversation knowing what you want to say about you. Because like I said, eventually the conversation is starting about them, but eventually it will probably come back to you, right? So as you think about why you're approaching this relationship with this person, as you're thinking about where you are in your career journey, think about the why you do what you do. One of my favorite leadership gurus is Simon Sinek. Maybe some of you know him from his books or his TED Talks. But the thing that really gained some popularity for him was his TED Talk on starting with your why. And that's what drives you. That's what you're passionate about. And anytime you have these conversations with people, don't be shy to let that network connection that you're talking about into a little bit about what drives you. Maybe that comes out in the conversation as you're sending that initial email to reach out to them if they're as you're building that rapport and creating that connection. Maybe that initial reach out, you tell them, a couple things about yourself and what you're passionate about and why you're reaching out to them. But try to get to a point where you know enough about what drives you and what you're passionate about that can become part of the conversation. Because again, if you think about it from the perspective of the other individual that you're talking to, this could lead to something, right? So if they hear passion in your voice, if they hear you being really interested in what they're talking about, then that can maybe help develop that rapport and relationship too. I think about the student that I was just telling you about that we built that connection with. When he came to that conversation with me, not only was he curious, but I could tell that he had thought through why he was reaching out to me. He had thought through potentially what he wanted to do, even if he learned some different things about my field. And I could tell he was already passionate about helping students, and that was kind of what was driving him to have that conversation with me. So he wasn't shy about letting his passion come through. And then because I saw that in him, I kind of changed my demeanor from more of a just sharing to, okay, hey, let's meet again. And if this is something you're really passionate about, I'm going to start giving you some advice on maybe how to get into the field, not just tell you about what I do, but this seems like something you really care about. Let's talk about how we can help each other, or I can help you kind of get to your goals. And so I gave him some advice about, how to apply to graduate schools, what kind of things that he would be wanting to do to get experience while he was a student. And again, it really worked out. So those are kind of ways that you can speak to your why and let your passion come through in your conversations. Also think about your background, right? You don't necessarily have to share your resume with somebody, but if you reach out over LinkedIn, they can see your LinkedIn profile. But think about some things that you're proud of in a work environment, some professional accomplishments that you've done. And again, these don't necessarily have to come out in the first conversation you have with somebody. That first conversation could just be that rapport building conversation where you're asking lots of questions. But, one or two conversations in, you're going to get to start talking about yourself a bit more. And that's when you want to be able to, because again, if you're potentially interested in that organization, you never know who this contact you're making is going to have. They might have a relationship with somebody in HR. They might know a manager that's hiring. So come prepared to talk about some professional things that you're proud of, some professional accomplishments that you have, and being able to talk not just about your passion, but about some of the things that you've truly accomplished. And then at some point, find that shared value. Again, not necessarily the first conversation, maybe not necessarily the second, because who knows exactly how you can help. But as you're listening and you're listening to things that interest them, listening to what their job entails, is there anywhere you can help, right? Like keep your ears open to um, see if there's any, we all have different skills and things that we can bring to the table. And so eventually that networking tie that we've built can become a mutually beneficial relationship. So, ask them about their why. And sometimes your whys might be able to come connect in the middle. And then always, 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 this is something that I drive into my students so much, because this can be the make or break on a continued relationship with somebody, is that following up and following through is what I call it. And that's send an initial thank you, right? Email, depending on the relationship you built, sometimes texts, those type of things, that makes a big difference. If you have a conversation with somebody and then, you log off of Zoom, or, when COVID is clear enough that we can start meeting with people in person, when you get back to your house or wherever and you get back in front of your computer, if you just send a really nice thank you note, that can mean so much. And in that thank you note, add a detail about something that stood out to you in the conversation, something they said that meant something to you. Put that in the thank you note and let them know that shows you really were listening and that they gave you a piece of advice that really moved you or something. And then don't be afraid to use a sentence like the one on the screen. Is there anyone else that you recommend I speak with? If you feel like that conversation went well and you built some rapport, don't be afraid to subtly ask to tap into their network, right? Because they've learned something about you through that conversation. You've learned something about them. And so they might be able to recommend a colleague or a friend in another industry or a friend in another organization that can have a conversation with you. And then you kind of start this circle back all over again, right? You keep in touch with person one, but then because they made that conversation, you can more easily make a connection with person two because person one's helped that connection, right? So it's not a cold call anymore. And then you can start building that rapport again. And eventually the idea is like your network starts to spiderweb and you start to have a much greater network than you did initially. I do see a question here, so let me pause and answer your question. Thank you so much for asking questions. I appreciate the interaction. Regarding a thank you note etiquette, should the thank you be a physical card or an email? Okay, that's a great question. I think in the day and time that we're a part of, an email is okay. An email's fine. Now, what I tell my students is, depending on how, if you're looking for a job, if you're actually in the job search, every little extra step can be a potential step in the right direction. So if you get an informational interview or you set up a networking connection with somebody in an organization that you're really interested in, I would say take that extra step and send a physical card. Even in our digital age that we're in, it means so much to get a physical thank you note. I remember a few years ago, I was on a search committee, and this is a little bit different. It's not necessarily networking, it's more interview based, but I was on a search committee, and at the end of the interview went well. We really appreciated the potential hire when he came in, but a day or two later, everybody that he had interviewed with on our team got a handwritten thank you note that wasn't a standard. I mean, I know sometimes like when you get married, for example, you write all these thank you notes and they all start sounding the same. But he wrote individual thank you notes to each of us on the search committee and referenced specific conversations that he had or specific moments of that interview where he made a connection with each individual person. And I can tell you that went a long way. I mean, I thought, if he was tied with somebody else, that really went in his favor because he not only sent the thank you note, but he sent specific things. And I think if you do that with a networking connection, that's just going to grow that bond a little bit. So I think an email can do that as well. But again, if you're in it to take that extra step, sending a physical card can really be helpful and mean a lot. So that's a really good question, Lindsay. Thank you for asking. And by all means, if anybody has any other questions, feel free to pop them up and let me know. Now, I've shared with you a lot of my own ideas and ideas that I've come across through my own research. But I did find when I was doing some research for my class, I found a TED Talk that really, it was funny. I'm watching this TED Talk and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is the way that I've always thought about networking. I just hadn't put a name to it. Um, I hadn't really thought of it as networking. And this gentleman, he's a professional leadership kind of guru. He's written some books. He's got a TED Talk. He has a blog. His name is David Burkus, and his TED Talk, I believe if you search the TED Talk, it's called Redefining Networking. And I don't know exactly how this works, but I can share my PowerPoint slides with Jordan at the end. And if she wants to be able to share these out with you, I've got a link to the talk here, but I actually have the talk in the slides right now for the sake of sharing it. I wasn't going to show you guys the talk right now, but I have it in the slides. That way, if I do share the slides, you guys can watch it. But he talks about some of these exact same things. And so it really kind of hit me in this really happy place. But he starts off his talk with saying networking isn't necessarily something you do. A network isn't something that you have. It's not all about meeting strangers. And he takes this really nuanced, really cool relational approach. And he says that in his mind, the best definition is understanding the network that is already around you and acting accordingly. So I kind of took it another step as I'm thinking about this. So like all the things that we just talked about, those are more what you do when you meet a stranger, right? Or when you reach out to somebody that you really don't have rapport with, or you're trying to meet somebody new. But he said you can also do that with people that maybe you've lost contact with, right? Or knowing who's a friend and who's a friend of a friend. And he kind of goes through this tiers of different ways that you can reach out to people. He says he's got three main points that I just thought were really interesting to add to the conversation that we've already been having. He says the greatest networking wins come from reaching out to old friends, not meeting strangers. In his experience, and one thing I love, I'm sorry, I digress a little bit, but in the talk, he gives these three main points, and then he gives an example for each of those. And so you can actually see it play out in like the real world. But he talks about how he, after high school or after college, you lose touch with some of the people that you were close with in high school or in college. Everybody goes their separate ways, but those are still connections and relationships that you had at some point. So they're not necessarily cold, but they might be a lukewarm connection, right? So, but you can reach out and you can and start kind of stoking that connection again, and ask and kind of using that for networking. And then he says the best way to meet new people is through friends of friends, right? My students like this because they're constantly, in a normal given school year, they're constantly surrounded by other people and they're building rapport in classes, they're building rapport in organizations and fraternities and sororities and so on and so forth. So it's easy to find friends of friends. As we grow up and, friendships are defined a little bit differently, but, Facebook, LinkedIn, these are ways that we can connect with other people and see if people that we know other people and kind of go that way and start making connections through people that we already know a little bit. And then he said, when you do meet a stranger, don't talk about work, talk about passion and interest. And I know I said that, I kind of stole that from him, but find a non-work reason to connect. That's going to, and he talks about how if you can connect with somebody in that first or second conversation at a level that's deeper than work, you're going to be able to build a relationship with somebody that's going to go above and beyond, and that will really build a strong network. So I said, here, let me click through my slides here. Like I said, I do have the talk in here, so I'll figure out if I can share these slides and we'll go from there. And then the next thing I want to say is be organized, right? We talked about being curious, being authentic, be organized is the third point. And all that's to say is find out, my slides appear to have frozen. It's not a big deal. We can move on. But set yourself up a spreadsheet, whether that's, there we go. Whether that's in Excel, whether it's just on a notebook, but set yourself up a spreadsheet or a list of people. Do some research on LinkedIn. I've got this list here that you can look at. We don't need to go through all of these verbatim, but these are types of contacts, 5 types of contacts that you might have. So find a list of people that you've researched, that it doesn't have to be long, right? It can be 3 to 5. that you maybe found through social media. That's the easiest thing to do these days, that you found through friends of friends. Write their names down on a piece of paper. Maybe tie some of this, put some label on them, right? Are they a direct contact? Are they somebody that you know directly, or maybe you've connected with them, so they're more of a first connection? Is it somebody that's a little bit warm, right? It's like he was talking about, it's a former classmate, or somebody that you knew in a previous life, say, or a few years ago. Um, and look at this list and look at the different types of connections, and make notes next to each person as to how you're connected to them, what's the through line that connects you. And then set yourself goals, right? Like, I want to reach out to person A on this list by this time, and set little goals for yourself. And then you've got something to work off of, right? Like, I'm the type of person, with my personality, I'm not great at organization, but I also know that if I do something like that, if I create a list and I give myself a checklist, it drives me, that organization itself drives me to want to accomplish it. I like seeing names on the list. I like seeing tasks that I can cross off. And excuse me. And so, be organized in how you do it. When you do have a meeting and you finally set up a connection with somebody, don't necessarily come at it blindly, right? Come at it. You don't have to write a script, but write 2 to 3. I would say even more, that like up to 5 questions. You want to be cognizant of people's time, especially the very first time you reach out. But have 5 or so questions that mean something to you, right? Like that you want to ask about what they do. The great thing about the internet is, some people might call it cyber stalking. I just call it being savvy and being strategic. If I find somebody that I want to meet on LinkedIn, I might look them up on Instagram. I might look them up on Facebook, and just like subtly take notes about the things that I find. I don't necessarily want to creep somebody out by dropping some hints that show that I've been searching them online, but it can help build some conversation. It can help you, as you're crafting some information, direct a conversation in a certain way, and be strategic in how you build that rapport. But come prepared to your meeting, with some of the things that you want to say as well. So, and then the last point that I want to say, as far as be curious, be authentic, be organized, and be resilient. And really, the main thing I want to say about this is, there is going to be an element of this that is, like sales, right? That you might reach out to somebody and they may not get back to you right away. People are busy. People are in a different headspace a little bit right now with COVID. I think COVID can help sometimes, but with the way we build reports, it's easier sometimes to make connection. But I also think that you have to come into it with a mindset of, if somebody doesn't respond, it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't want to talk to me right now. Not everybody's going to give you the courtesy of an email back, even saying I don't have time. But what I have found is, most people, and it's just my observation, have an element of wanting to help. If it's all in how you reach out, right? The kind of language that you use when you reach out. Like I said, have a curious attitude. Even that initial email, ask somebody for advice, ask somebody for a little know-how about their organization. But again, if they say no, go back to number 2 on your list and reach out to that person. And just know that not everybody is going to connect in the same way, and not everybody's going to want to do this at the same level. So, just a couple tips for when you do make that reach out. If you're going to do it over email, in the subject line, you can, if it's a connection where you were referred by another individual, you can put that in there. But have a really brief but real clear subject line, and it can be something like, referred by your friend, or referred by our friend John Smith, or looking for information about your organization, something like that. But again, you want to make somebody open your email, right? So you find a way to craft your words in that subject line that make that connection, especially if you're connecting through another individual, like you found them on LinkedIn, you noticed you were a first or second connection, something like that. People open emails, 47% of people open emails solely on the subject line, right? So you want to put some effort into that. And it's hard to, without knowing individual scenarios, it's hard to like come up with great subject lines, because every relationship is slightly different. But you do want to put a little bit of effort into that. Get to the point and be a real person, right? Who referred you? remind people who you are. What's that mutual interest in your body of your email? Just be clear. Here's what I want to learn. I tell my students that they have the benefit of playing that student card, right? When I spent 2 years working with our alumni, and the constant thing that came back was, I want to help students. I want to help students. I want to help students. But people want to help people. You don't have to be a student, but be clear about why you're reaching out and what your intention is. Open up the chat again real quick. I can't answer that. I'm happy to share them, but maybe Jordan, you can hop in and see if the slides will be shared.
Yes, I can email them. Yeah, I can email them after the webinar too.
Perfect. So yes, you guys can get these slides as well. And then basically give the recipient of your email, the person you're reaching out to, give them a call to action. Like, give them something, ask them, can I have 20 minutes of your time? You can respond to this email, or you can text me at this number. Some people don't mind a little informal, if you're happy to respond to text and set up a time that way. Say, I'm available on these days, and just give them I'm happy to be flexible around your schedule. I always like to lead with things that kind of like, I understand you're very busy right now. I only want 20 minutes of your time. You tell me what works with your schedule, and I'll make it work, or something like that. So just kind of know this might be the opportunity where you need to be a little bit flexible too, to kind of fit into somebody else's schedule as well. Okay, so I just wanted to see if you guys had any ideas. I've been brainstorming this a little bit outside of class, and then a little bit with my students. Obviously, the way that we connect with people has changed dramatically over the last, what's almost a year now, right? We can't just walk into a coffee shop and sit down and meet a stranger. I'm curious what you guys think as far as good, bad, any new strategies for connection. Do you think that, from your perspective, this makes it easier to connect with people or harder? I'm just curious. This is something, as somebody who works in this realm and teaches this, I'm just curious other people's perspective. Anybody want to share something in the chat or think of an idea? I was going to wait a second. I know typing can take a little bit. I say we can now network on social media or through Zoom. And I really appreciate that you said that, because that to me is, I was thinking about this with my students, and I was saying, a lot of us, yes, we do get Zoom fatigue. I like this tomorrow morning, I'm going to teach back to back 3 classes in a row, starting at 7:40 and ending at 12:45. So there is a lot of Zoom that goes on. But if you think about it, it's a lot easier to go down to your office if if you have a home office or something, or just pop on Zoom for 20 minutes from a time perspective. If you're somebody who's really busy, it's much easier to find 20 minutes to connect with somebody over Zoom than to drive across town, meet at a coffee shop. So I do think there are some positives about ease of communication. Now, the bad that comes with that, like we talked about, there are lots of Zoom. People can have Zoom fatigue. I do think that it is harder to build rapport. I've noticed that teaching online, like, one of my favorite things to do is to build rapport with my classes in the first couple of days of class. But when you only see people on the other end of a screen, it's harder to do that. But it also then challenges you to really have content, right? Really build that relationship through the words that you say, and have good questions and come to the table. The student or the former student I was telling you about, we've completely, most of our, because we've never really lived in the same town, so most of our professional relationship has been over the phone or over Zoom anyway. So we've really just kind of kept it up. I think we've gotten together in 3 years. We've met like 2 times for lunch, but we've been able to do that. So I really appreciate this kind too. We should be thankful for the resources rather than things we cannot do. And that's why I'm more of an optimistic person. So I like to put a positive spin on this and see how we can really use this new environment that we're a part of right now to be beneficial. So that's why I think, go into these conversations and have a positive attitude, right? Like, be resilient, but think about it, say things like, I'm willing to, I'd love just 20 minutes. Set a short goal, and people are more likely to say yes. Lindsay, I'm going to read your chat real quick. I could see it both being good and bad. Good, we are more connected online, internet, yet less commute times. Bit more flexible, yes. You might be tired of interfacing online. Oh, I like that. I like that phone call idea. That I've actually done that a couple times with my mentee. He wants to do Zoom sometimes, but I love fresh air. Like, I thrive in the fresh air. So I've actually done that. I've moved away and I said, hey, can we just talk? And I'll throw on my headphones and I'll put my phone in my pocket and we'll just walk and we'll talk. And I feel like that's a fun thing too. So I appreciate you sharing that as well. But I just wanted to kind of bring that up as something to think about, right? Because we are living in, at least right now, in a reality that's a little bit different. I'm optimistic that it will change as we get vaccinated and move into the fall. We may have more of an opportunity to interface with people face to face. But when you're reaching out to strangers, it kind of can help to have at least one barrier kind of taken down. So I am running out of time. I wanted to open the floor for some questions. I have some. I'm gonna stop here. This is not a LinkedIn presentation, but I put a little bit of information on these slides about LinkedIn. And just as you can see, a few bullets here, a couple tips for how to improve things on your LinkedIn presence. For those of you that aren't on LinkedIn, as we talk about networking, I would challenge that LinkedIn is probably the best free tool for networking. So if you don't have a profile, LinkedIn has great free training help videos on their website in regards to how to create a profile. So there's all kinds of information out there. We could do a whole nother hour-long webinar on how to create a LinkedIn profile. But just real quick, so when these slides go out and you can look at these on your own, I put a few bullets on some things that you can do on your profile to make it a little bit stronger. But then I've also put a few slides that show some different ways to reach out to people on LinkedIn. If you're a graduate of a university, and you have that on your profile, like for me, Indiana University of Bloomington, not only do I work there, but I graduated there. You can go to the university's LinkedIn page, and they'll have an alumni section, and you can search alumni based on where they're located in the country or across the world, based on where they work, based on the type of jobs they have. And the reason I think this feature is outstanding is because it, again, if it's a cold caller, if it's somebody you may not know that well, having a point of commonality always helps, right? So if you can say, I graduated from University of Illinois back in 1997 or 2001, you've already got something to talk about, right? You're both graduated from the same university, so building that initial rapport is already there. So I kind of have a couple slides that show you how to do that. And then you can also find, if you're interested in an organization, like a certain job or a certain company, like Eli Lilly, for example, that's a big one up in Indianapolis, not far from where I'm from. You can go to Eli Lilly's, and then you can see anybody, how many connections you have within Eli Lilly already. So do you know somebody maybe that works there that you didn't even realize, or is a friend of maybe a friend of a friend works there? So you can already see ways that you can start connecting through this great free tool. Yes, LinkedIn has paid features, but you can do everything that you need to do on LinkedIn absolutely for free. So I'll share these slides afterwards, and so that way Jordan can get them out to you all. But thank you guys for being a communicative audience. I appreciate the time. I love talking about these things, and I hope that I feel like I've given you some good content. I hope you can take it out into the world and you can grow your network with it. So thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you, Wes. That was great. I have my contact information. If you want to ask any questions. Oh, we might have something in the chat here. Oh.
Thank you, Lindsay. I appreciate it.
Yes, I agree. It was a great presentation. So there's my contact information. And in case you have any further questions, I'll be sure to email the slides afterwards. Let me go and start my video again. There I am. So our next webinar is navigating the flexible and remote job market. We have Bree Reynolds coming in next week, who's actually a career coach. So that will be Tuesday, February 16th at 7 p.m. And let's see here. And then we have, this is the remaining ones for February, but we have a lot more career webinars well into the spring. We also have more webinars related to our business series, our technology series, our crafty adults, and our writers workshops. So please visit champaign.org/events for more information here. And once again, the library has reopened for grab and go service and computer use. So please visit our website for more information. And I'm trying to see if there's any more questions here for Wes. Again, Wes, that was great. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, I think there's one question.
Let me look at that real quick. It says, is it okay to reach out to someone you don't know via the LinkedIn messaging? Absolutely. I would treat that. In fact, I think that's one of the big benefits of LinkedIn is that you can do that. And the nice thing about LinkedIn is you can also see how you're connected to that person if you are. If you're not, now I will tell you the one thing that is a little bit of a barrier in LinkedIn is you can't directly message somebody that you're not connected to. So let's say you go to an organization and you're interested in, somebody that you don't know we'll use Eli Lilly, right? You want to learn more about somebody who works in marketing for Eli Lilly. Well, you can find their profile, but you can't necessarily send them a direct email until you connect with them. So what I tell my students to do, and I think it's a great thing, is reach out to them through the connection feature. Like when you see their profile, there's a button that says connect, right? It's going to prompt you to write a message to that person and tell them why you want to connect. Always tell somebody why you want to connect with them. Don't ever send a blind connection, because I get those all the time and I don't know what to do with them. Like, I don't know why. Sometimes I'm like, well, why are you reaching out to me? You didn't tell me why you want to build this connection. So in that little message box, just say, my name is Lindsay. I'm really interested in your organization and what you do. I'd love to learn a little bit more about you. Can we connect? And then once they connect with you, then you can kind of send that more formal email. So yes, absolutely. I think it's a great idea.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, you guys have a great evening.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you again, Wes. I don't see any further questions. Thank you, Wes, again. Everyone have a wonderful night. I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.